And now, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Welcome, everyone, to Down the Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice while doing our best to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. I'm Joanne Shaw, owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design, and with me is my co-host, Matthew Dressing. Hello, Matthew. Sorry I was late. Thanks for waiting for me, everybody.
No worries. Good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Matthew Dressing, owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. As landscape designers and gardeners, we believe it's important and possible to have great gardens which are sustainable and low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen.
That's right. And this month on Down the Garden Path, we are looking at some of our favorite perennials. Tonight, we're working our way to the end of June with a look at two classic perennials who have long been staples in our garden. And I'm curious to know who has them in their garden, aren't you, Matt?
Yes.
Yes, Phlox and Campanula. Whether you're looking for something with height, not someone with height, you're looking for a tall, anyway, something with height, or something with a little lower, that is a little lower growing. These classics have got you covered. So do you have Phlox or Campanula in your garden? Which varieties? Because like we said, there's some tall ones and there's some not so tall ones, right? Some ground cover ones. How do they grow for you? Which one's your favorite? And let us know by writing us here at instudio101@gmail.com. And I love it when we get up to these weird and wacky starts, thanks to me and my technical challenges.
Technology. Don't you just love it?
Don't you just love it? Yeah. See, the podcast people listening, when you listen to the podcast, you know that we're late because, it's a podcast. But those lovely radio listeners that have been waiting, wondering where in the world are they at 7 p.m. on Eastern Standard Time? We're late because of me. So I'm on my husband's computer. So you've got the emails because I won't be able to see them. Zoom is working, headphones are working. Those are two really the most important things, right?
That's right. We are here. And yes, I said, whether you're looking for someone with some height or someone with lower growing, I always think of plants as
people.
Living people, like he or she, right?
Yes,
They're
I know.
All temperamental, have their own likes and dislikes.
But I don't know why reading it made me feel like it was like...
You were right. It's totally incorrect. However,
I know, I get it. But I'm excited to talk about these two because one I've been using, it's funny because one I've been using more of lately, and one I used to use all the time when I first started, and I can't even remember the last time. I certainly don't have it in my garden, and I can't remember the last time I put it in someone else's garden. So so I'm excited to hear from our listeners and your perspective as well about Phlox and Campanula.
Yeah, two great perennials that are still out there and available and constantly being grown and hybridized, etc. So lots of classic old varieties and cultivars, and then there's a lot of new and exciting ones as well, for sure.
Yeah. So do you want to start with Phlox?
Let's start with Phlox. Sure, let's start with Phlox. So Phlox, that's also his genus name, Phlox. So Phlox by genus have two different species that we'll often see. So we'll see subulata and we'll see paniculata. Both are native to the eastern United States and southeastern Canada. So there are North American natives, but there are also a lot of other species that we'll see that have slightly different forms and shapes that are also native elsewhere as well.
Okay, but it's not a true native, or then it's been hybridized, the ones we typically use?
We'll see a lot of the cultivars of our native forms, right? But we rarely see the straight species anymore.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. That's good. So I think people, to simplify, it's like to ground cover, that they're just finished blooming. They had a long, because May was so kind of cool and it's some hot peaks and then cool down again. I feel like the ground cover, the spreading, the low creeping phlox is commonly used.
Yeah.
Really, really, some seasons when it gets hot fast, it's like one and done, right? It's out and then it's done. But this year, I feel like it really, really shined in people's gardens and lasted a little bit longer. And it's nice. It kind of comes up. I find I'm starting to use it more because I feel like it bridges the gap from the bulbs to the other perennials, because
Mhm.
sometimes things go from like really colorful with bulbs and then nothing, and then you wait for the perennials. And I feel like the creeping phlox, having it in dotted in, because it's not huge, it's low growing and very very shades of kind of pastelly, right? There's a few bright pink ones. Whoops. And that's what I get for talking with my hands. But I think I'm starting to put it more in, on edges, and mine has done well, surprisingly, along the my walkway. So it's gotten like quite a bit of snow load. So I bought some more to put along the curb to see how it does in the winter.
Yeah. Oh, very nice.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. Do you like it?
I do. You know what? The creeping phlox or the moss phlox, that's our Panicula subulata. So if you think sub underneath or low, lower, the subulata, I quite like it. There's a house that I pass by regularly in our neighborhood, and they're a quarter lot, and they've built up this tall rock garden. So great for rock gardens, alpine
Mm-hmm.
kind of settings. And they have a huge swath of it. It's been there for quite a while, and I'm sure they've put in a couple other ones. But there's a light pink one and a blue one that grow there, and they're like 2 to 3 feet wide. They cover the hill that's about 2.5 feet tall. So they're
Okay.
big, large swaths. And like you said, we've had a cooler season so far, so the
Mm-hmm.
flowers really held on. I was able to enjoy them for a very long time. Like you said, when it gets really hot, that speeds through the flowers production. They can be very small. They can grow smaller. They can grow fewer, or they grow normal size but last very, very
Mm-hmm.
little. So
Yeah.
these ones were a literal, just gorgeous, gorgeous blanket for weeks at a time.
Yes. And I mean, even when they lose their leaf, lose their flower, I mean, that's one thing I've started to appreciate was actually, like you said, moss phlox, like the texture of the foliage and the green ground cover, like it's still okay. It's still there, right? It's not like a bulb where you have to wait for something to die and then remove it, or something that, doesn't look good after it blooms. I think it looks okay. It's a great understory for other plants that might come up, and then you kind of have that phlox underneath. So I think it's pretty versatile, and I'm, after all these years designing, I'm kind of seeing new purposes for it. But I do like it, like you said, around rocks. Like I think that's quite nice.
Yeah, that nice, like needle evergreen foliage is just so dense
Hmm.
that the texture between like a rock or a harder surface, or like you said, like a living ground cover, just
Yes.
playing around the bases of other shrubs or larger perennials that have yet to fully leaf out
Hmm.
or grow up is fantastic.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good companion to, we talked about sedums last week,
Yes.
right? And the different varieties of sedums and the different textures of sedums, and the phlox can kind of go in that, right? And I think they'll be a little bit taller, like a little thicker. I almost think of it as thickness, right? Because
Yes.
I wouldn't call any of the ground cover sedums or the phlox tall, but I would say they're a little bit thicker, but kind of an interesting texture, and they do kind of weave together.
Yeah, you get that nice. You're right with the thickness, right?
Yeah.
That needly evergreen foliage almost looks so soft and thick and matted. Yeah, so it does add that beautifully, for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
So a little bit about some of our growing conditions. We're tantalizing our listeners with this versatile ground cover. But our Phlox subulata, we're going to see them hardy from anywhere from zone 2 all the way through zone 9. So we've got a great, way up in Canada, all the way down to mid-southern United States. They're going to love full sun. So these guys prefer full sun as much as you can give them. They will tolerate a nice partial shade. So if you can give them some good quality hours through the mid part of the day, they will, take some shade at other times of the day. But they do want to be out during that time, that mid time where the sun
Okay.
is definitely the brightest. Like you said, again, a nice low growing, evergreen, matted kind of appearance. We're going to see them growing, depending on the cultivar, range from 4 to 6 inches tall.
Hmm.
And then they're going to grow anywhere, again, depending on that cultivar, anywhere from 6 to 12 inches wide as well. So a nice sprawling evergreen mat of needle-like foliage. Again, just nice for a nice edge or a border or amongst the rocks. As far as our soil, it does prefer average soil, so you don't need anything too special. It will tolerate some humus rich or some good organic matter in the soil as well, and prefers average soil drainage and tolerates drought very well. So
Okay.
when you've got that a nice established creeping phlox or moss phlox, and those rock gardens, or again, like you said, like along the edge of the walk or against the driveway, but she
Hmm.
gets established in there, that drought will be quite tolerable for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, and even I have one home by me that also has like large swaths, and it is actually that strip between two driveways.
Yes,
and,
yeah.
and they've got a bunch of rocks, and then they've got like different colors, kind of just, it's almost, when you look at it full in bloom, it's almost like a painting.
Yes.
It's like you've got brush strokes of this color pink and this color pink and this color purple and this color, it really, yeah, it's really quite lovely. So yeah.
That would be so striking.
Mhm.
I was
Yeah.
in Toronto visiting a friend, and I forget where we were walking down one of the major roads, I think Avenue, and there was a side of a house who had something very similar, but on an angle, had beautiful rocks, and in the spaces, instead of planting like a ground cover like that, they just put weirdly odd shaped, like ovals and kidney bean shapes of artificial turf. And I was like, oh, that's so sad because you could do such a beautiful show. You're on the edge of a major
Meaning
road.
like they wrapped artificial turf into shapes and stuff?
No, like they were like cut out into like the shape of a kidney bean or like a weird
Oh.
oval. And then they were on like a 45-degree angle nearly. But there were these big, beautiful boulders that were just left. And with the sidewalk, it was just so stark and like harsh looking. It was brutal.
That's so funny, eh? With the things we see that other people don't see.
Yes.
I know. It's like,
Oh,
I know.
here's my card, sir.
I know, exactly. Put it under the rock.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
um, so yeah, I'm excited that these can go all the way to zone 2. So that's great for our northern gardeners, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're going to hit like northern Manitoba with a zone 2. So that province and territorial line through Canada for sure. And then we're
Perfect.
looking at South Carolina and a little further across the states
Yeah.
with our zone 8 and 9.
And we have in our notes about the cost of them. They do tend to, because they tend to be, the subulata one, I feel, is a little bit more inexpensive because they often sell it in like the 4-inch pots, especially early in the spring.
Yeah.
The 4-inch pots, and then the 1-gallon pots that are usually like full, but once they start blooming, they're like more expensive, right? Because it's full, and the creeping phlox is kind of come outside of the container, and so it's a bit, and so they might be a little bit more towards $20, right? Between $15 and $20.
Yeah.
But when they stop blooming and they're all green, that's also when they tend to be able to get them a bit more on sale as well. So there is something to buy almost after they're finished blooming for a really good deal.
Yeah, exactly. And when you buy a 1-gallon pot, like you said, it's overflowing.
Yeah.
And if you can catch those on sale, they're great to fill in for sure.
So it's a good deal. So then the opposite are the tall ones, right? Yeah. Did we have any questions that you wanted to get to before we go on to the next one?
You know what? No questions so far. I mean, we did have, as I look, we did have Steve write in. He sent us a very cool picture that we'll have to take a look at. He shared a white aloe vera plant. He's living in Tampa, Florida. I just thought he'd want to see it. So
very cool. I've got it on my phone, actually. Thank you, Steve. That is very cool.
It is very cool. And then Spring has also written in, hi, Joanne and Matt. With food prices rising so much, cannabis growers are back to growing veggies. And she sent a little meme, local drug dealers now growing lettuce, which is very funny too.
Which is very funny, yeah.
And as I say no, Irene has written in as well saying, hi, Joanne and Matt. Do you deadhead these? No, good question, Irene. You don't need to necessarily deadhead them. You can leave them. However, the moss phlox, the creeping phlox, they do very well with a good shear right deep into the foliage. So you've got, like, say it's about 4 inches thick, taking off a good half deep into that evergreen mat of foliage for our subulata, will encourage a nice, vigorous reflush of bright olive to emerald green foliage hardening off into its darker evergreen. So if it does look a little ratty, or over the years you've got a nice big clump, maybe there's a few dead spots in it, giving it a nice good shear will help refill it in and give it some nice new vigor again. So excellent question, Irene. Yeah, thank you. I had it in the notes and we were moving along.
Oh, there we go. Well, now you said so it rejuvenates the foliage, but you're not going to get a second bloom, right?
No, as well. And I think we were talking on the weekend or on Friday about that too, was I've rarely, and you've rarely seen it really give you a really good rebloom. I've seen the odd time it, like a bubble here or there, just a little cluster pop up. And I think that's more like stress conditions or, wacky weather. And I've seen that once, maybe every like 5 to 7 years on a random plant. So no, there's no real reblooming. And I don't know of any reblooming species either. They're all going to be mid-spring to late spring, and then quick or nice and long like this year, depending on our spring.
Yeah. And so, like I mentioned, it is a good thing when you're planting your bulbs. It's, certainly not going to grow up tall enough to hide the foliage of the leaves or anything, but it is like a nice stopgap, to kind of take your eye away, I think, from the dying foliage of your tulips and daffodils to, looking at something else that's bright. I think I've got some by one of my large rocks, and then my Roseanne geranium, which, gets off to a little slower start. So then that's done. And then the Roseanne just kind of covers it, and we're all good to go. So yeah, I think it really does belong almost in everybody's garden. And I think this season, and I think it has been that early season this year that got me really thinking, like really appreciating it again. So I put it into a lot of designs because I've always said, I don't do a ton of perennials necessarily in my designs, but they have to bloom for more than 2 weeks, aside from a peony. Of course, everybody needs to get peony, but those like, really quick bloomers that are kind of one and done, I'm not as much of a fan for it. So if we can get a couple weeks out of the subulata phlox, and they're key weeks, I think, from the bulbs to the other perennials, then I think it's and they don't take up a lot of space and virtually no maintenance, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
I think they're perfect. But the other one has a place in most gardens too, right?
You know what? This one has long been referred to a mainstay of every perennial garden or perennial border since time immemorial. Classic, beautiful, paniculata, our phlox paniculata. So much like our hydrangea paniculata, we're going to see them grow up with those domes or those pointy clusters or panicles on the top of our foliage, or upright stems of foliage. These are a little bit more short-lived perennials, so they may need some dividing or some replacing just to keep them vigorous and growing as well. But again, a great showstopper, blooming anywhere from early summer all the way through mid-fall, depending on the cultivar. We're going to grow them in full sun, and they can grow anywhere from 2 feet to 4 feet tall, depending on the cultivar. Again, much like our phlox subulata or creeping phlox, nice average to humus-rich soil, preferring more on the average side, prefers average soil moisture. And again, once established, tolerating the dry conditions very, very well. Again, we get lots of colors as well. So blooming early summer through mid-fall, we're going to see white, light pink, lavender, mauve, lilac, and there are even some true like bright red varieties as well out there.
And I was given a coral one, so it's got quite the coral look to it. And I have to say, one of the things that I love about it is I think of all you mentioned. You're right. You often do need to divide them. That your clump might get a little big and kind of die out in the center, and dividing them. I think it is the number one shared perennial. Well-behaved shared perennial.
I was gonna say,
right? Well-behaved. So, because usually, my saying when I tell people like, if somebody's giving you something, that means they have too much of it, which means you will surely have too much of it. But that's not the case with phlox, right? Like, it is not the clump stays a reasonable size. And like we said, it kind of might die out a little bit on the fringes or in the center, which makes you have to divide it. But it doesn't seed, it doesn't jump, it doesn't run. It's easy to, it really is a very, very, I can't think of anything more well behaved, actually. I'm just trying to think,
Yeah.
um, it's very well behaved. I'd like to do a no staking. Like, I'm not fond of having to add stakes, and it's not quite as floppy as, let's say, a Russian sage or a delphinium, but it's good to have it kind of tucked in between other plants. I think it will lean towards the sun. But otherwise, it's a pretty good one. The foliage is nice and green, and I haven't seen it prone to any insect damage. Sometimes I know some of the is it the cultivars that get a little bit of mildew?
I just say, yeah, the main thing in a lot of the breeding for them and the crossing for our upright phlox or our garden phlox, yeah, is for the powdery mildew resistance for sure. Especially when we get hot, humid weather and we end up watering at the soil or getting the base of the foliage where there's lower air circulation, these guys can go white within a matter of days if you've got powdery mildew. So if you know you have powdery mildew in your garden or you've fought it before, especially with some of the larger trees, like I think Norway maple off the top of my head, especially, check for your powdery mildew resistant varieties and cultivars.
Okay.
The only other thing that we can see on our paniculata or our garden phlox, pardon me, is in very hot weather or extended hot weather, we might see a touch of spider mites. So they
Oh,
will
okay.
enjoy coming and they create that weird mottling on the foliage. So it looks like it's kind of like speckling very finely. But then we also see the telltale signs of the nice, very fine, dense webbing as well. And that's our telltale sign of our spider mites. If you look closely, they're moving around in there. But other
Yeah.
than that, yeah, those are the two major things, and otherwise very disease resistant and
Hmm.
left to do their thing.
Yeah, and a really good companion plant that goes with a lot of other things. I have some with like this purple salvia, which we mentioned. I think we
Yes.
did salvias last year, right, in
Yep.
perennial month.
Salvias and
But
speedwells.
yeah, and but also with what's my other thing I'm trying to think of? Well, even with roses, and even they just blend nicely. I kind of like the pink, the other varieties versus a white, because hydrangeas at that time of year, they're kind of blooming about the same time as other hydrangeas. A lot of the hydrangeas, right, which are already white. So I feel like adding a second color is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think they perform quite well for a good part of the summer with a lot, not a lot of management. So I think it definitely falls in the category that clients ask for as far as a low maintenance perennial.
Yeah, definitely. These are easy care, low maintenance perennials. And that's true about our campanulas for the most part as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see low care, easy maintenance. If you do like white, I think I jumped over it when we were talking about colors. A lot of the phlox cultivars also come with colored eyes. So what you'll see is that nice panicle with those rounded 5-star points, those rounded 5 petals, making kind of a rough star. And what we'll see is either solid colors, but we can also get bicolors and bitones. And a lot of them will have a colored eye or throat. So right in the center of the flower, we'll see like a nice pink, but then we'll see a nice darker rose pink in the middle. Or we'll have a
Mm-hmm.
very nice light lavender or pink out on the outside of the petal, but the eye is a pure crystal white as well. So there's some good variation there as well. So you can get those white. I was just thinking like with your hydrangeas with, wanting white, but maybe you had mainly a white garden or you did like white. There's a way to work in that color, but also that white as well. So there's some flexibility there.
Mm-hmm.
We also didn't tell our listeners that we can also see a few like the Shockwave and I think Gold Mine Improved. They'll come with variegated foliage as
Ah.
well. So we can get a nice green center along the midrib and then a nice irregular cream or white, usually kind of a cream or a gold color around the edges as well. So there's some ways to add some interest in there as well. Just thinking as we always like, perennials that do multiple things when it's not
Yeah.
in flower, you've got a nice kind of variegated color
Hmm.
there as well as she
Yeah.
grows.
Well, that's good.
So as we, oh, go
Mhm.
ahead. Was there
No, you
anything
go.
else?
No, I don't know. I don't know what else to positive to say about them. You know,
Well,
um,
I was going to say as well, just some of our other uses. You kind of talked about designing with them, just as well as they are very fragrant. There are a number of them that have a beautiful fragrance to them. They're great as cut flowers or dried flowers, so you can take off all the leaves and or use the leaves if you're putting them into a vase, hang them and dry them. They make a nice dry panicle. They're great as mass plantings. Again, if you imagine the border groups of threes or fives as a
mm,
backdrop or a small step up in their gradation. And they're very attractive to hummingbirds and butterflies because those panicles have just a nice little bit of a throat on them as they reconnect to the panicle spire. So, yeah, hummingbirds, butterflies, cut flowers, fragrance,
oh,
mass
good.
planting are a few of our other uses.
Yeah. Now, what about zone? Did I miss that?
No, I probably missed that, but they're going to be anywhere from zones 4 to 8. So
Okay.
not as cold hardy as our
Yeah.
subulata, but definitely zone 4s through 8. So a good range as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah, so again, if you have either of those, whether you have the creeping phlox in your garden or the taller phlox, the garden phlox as we like to call it, we would love to hear from you or love a picture even. And if you have any concerns about yours or questions, we would love to hear them. So yeah, and so on to yeah, we can talk about shortly after our midway little break. We can talk about the campanullas, that's the one. So I've been started to use the phloxes a lot more, especially the creeping phlox. I've been using the garden phlox for a while, but the campanullas were like all the rage when it's funny because I worked in the garden center when I was first a designer and saw them all the time, and I love purple, so I use them all the time. And then I don't know what happened. I stopped using them. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to us talking more about them.
Yes, exactly. And just as you say, I'm going to do my thing and our
Do
mid
your
show
thing.
station ID. So thanks everyone for joining us here live on Reality Radio 101. I'm Matthew Dressing here with my co-host Joanne Shaw, and you're listening to Down the Garden Path. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. You can also do so when you're off the air by buying our brand new book, Down the Garden Path, a step-by-step guide to your Ontario garden, available now on Amazon. We enjoy learning every week with you, along with you here on the show, through our research and from the wonderful guests who join us here throughout the show over the year. Again, don't forget you can spend more time with us on Down the Garden Path. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Our handle there is at Down the Garden Path Podcast. You can also find us on your favorite podcast provider with a plethora of wonderful episodes, past episodes, covering lots more perennials than we will this month. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button to be notified of new content. And please don't forget to like and share and leave us a comment. We love hearing from you. You can always write us here at instudio101@gmail.com. You can also write us to the podcast web or email address, down the garden path podcast at hotmail.com. So down the garden path podcast at hotmail.com. And Joanne and I both get to see that.
Yes, that's the key part, right, Matt? We both get that
Yes.
email. It goes to both of our email addresses. So yeah, perfect.
So we'll be quicker to respond and see your emails. So yes, thank you everybody for tuning in. And if you're listening to the podcast, hello to you too. Speaking of writing in, Sue has written in, I think in response to what are your favorite plants? Give us your questions and let us know what you're growing. Sue has written in, hi Garden Path, my Oseria rose or Syria, or I think as I'm pronouncing it right, or it's a hybrid rose. Sue is in zone 7B, Athens, Georgia, loving the show. So thank you very much for sharing one of your favorite plants. We are I think, going to try to do a rose show, a little bit of a deeper dive into each of the roses eventually as well. Perhaps this year in our shrub month, but we will let you know.
And we did what I think we did a man, I keep doing that. I'm sorry, everybody. We did a shout out last week that we were going to do on an upcoming show, and maybe that's next week's show, Matt. Were those underused? I know that doesn't qualify for the roses, but like an underused perennial, one that people don't talk much about. I thought maybe you and I could each pick 5, or we could get some listeners to kind of write in. I'd love to hear, just a favorite perennial that's maybe a little bit more obscure. You never see it in anybody else's garden. It has a certain characteristic that you love about it, but it's not, quote unquote, one of the popular ones, or they're harder to find maybe at the garden center or something like that. So I thought, we could have fun with it, and maybe I don't know that I could come up with 10. I probably can come up with 5, and I thought if we could both do that, or we get some listeners to write in and tell us about some of their, lesser known, but really, really, what's the word? Like hardworking, long bloom, something interesting in their garden. And even if you're not in our zone, that's okay. There's somebody else listening who's in your zone, right?
That's right. Yeah. I love exploring the different plants that we can't grow here, like in Sue's 7B, or, down in Florida in a 10 or a 9 or 11. So yeah, that's a great thing. So keep that in mind between now and the next episode.
That's
your
right.
top 5 workhorses that survive everything and bloom forever, or just add that unparalleled interest in your garden. I've already got my first one in the top of my head.
Me too. But sometimes there's one that's in the background, and it just is just your reliable friend, right? That you don't do anything, and it doesn't change, and it doesn't spread and stuff. If you have a brat that does spread and seed, we can mention it too. That might be why it's underused. So I'd love to have some of those listener comments and listener choices out there. But campanellas, you can't beat the color, right?
That's right. And before we jump into the colors, I have to address another thing that I think you probably got in your garden center too. How do you say it?
Oh, yes.
Because you say campanella.
Uh-huh.
I say campanula, but others say campanula. So it's one
tomato, potato.
Exactly.
I think I say it with the Italian accent, maybe campanella. I don't know. But yes, I think when we start describing it, they're purple bellflower. Like, would the common name be bellflower?
Yeah, our common name is bellflower. So campanulas, but we're often going to see them as our bellflowers. And there's a lot of different bellflowers,
yes,
with lots of different names on them. And like our phlox, we've got, there's some upright, taller forms, and then there's some nice low-growing, spreading, flowering forms. So they kind of complement our phlox nicely as well. So what do we think? Let's jump in with, you said with color.
Yeah, I think there's white, right? But they all are purple and white. Is there any pink?
There is some pinks, depending on some of the different ones. It's
a very cottage, I think of them as like the cottage when you say cottage garden, although phlox, I think phlox fits into that as well.
Definitely.
And definitely, even though they're bellflower, they're all kind of different. Some are a little more open, some are a little tighter. The waterfall, like if we talk about the low one first, is it waterfall?
Yep. Waterfall is one of them.
Yeah, so that was one of the ones that I used to use quite a bit because I quite loved it. My thing is for them is I think they were just a little shorter lived. So I think that's why I kind of petered out, because they kind of petered out on me. So I don't know. I don't know if there's been some improvement in the varieties at all. And but yeah, I mean, I think they're very interesting in that you could have several different varieties of bellflower in your garden, and you might not know that they're all campanellas.
Yeah, exactly. Because the blue waterfall one is actually a Serbian bellflower. Right. And then we get into some of the other ones, the Carpathian bellflower, clustered, Dalmatians. So there's a lot of different ones. But like you were saying, we've got anything from our blues, our purples, our light blues. There are some mauve and some lilacs that we can find within the different species, some pinks and some whites. And again, like you were saying as well, they get their name from that bell shape bellflower. So whether they're kind of upright or outward facing, like our Serbian bellflower or some of our Carpathian bellflowers, or they're nodding like the Korean bellflower, we get a distinct bell or trumpet kind of shape within the flower itself. So a wide variety of how that bell is going to hang or what that's going to look like. So looking at its growing conditions, we're going to see some, again, full sun with a lot of them tolerating a little bit of partial sun as well. So full sun, but a little bit of protection as the day goes by, keeps them vigorous and a little happier as they go.
Okay.
Zone wise, we're going to see a nice wide range, anywhere from zone 3, so upwards of Winnipeg, all the way down to zone 9. And I'm very quick to say a Canadian city name when I say the higher zones. So I'm going to have to learn some key cities in the zones of like zone 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 as we talk about these zone ranges. Yeah. And then soil conditions, again, for our growing conditions, they're going to prefer normal to average soil texture. So nothing too elaborate, just a normal to a sandy soil. They can also tolerate some dry soil or some average moist in the soil. They don't want to sit in a clay soil that doesn't drain.
Okay.
So you've got a little bit of clay, but you've got some good drainage. Just make sure it is draining. Clay is good. It's the only actual soil particle that holds food. So clay gets that bad rap, but we don't want it sitting in clay or standing in water. So kind of like our phlox as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and they could be very much a companion to our phlox that we talked about, because they bloom more in June, right? So if we had our May creeping phlox, and if you were going for that rock garden look and that kind of carpet, you could really achieve that with, I think, a lot of different flowering, in addition to our sedums, which I think belong there because they just are such a hard worker and so easy. But, adding the phlox and then adding some of the waterfall Serbian bellflowers, like you mentioned, that really, will bloom June to August, and they might even bloom a second time in early fall. And they look good, again, edging, rock garden, that type of thing. So I think it could definitely be, what's wrong?
Oh, your volume just like dropped by half.
Oh, I'm better? No?
Nope.
Nope.
She's okay going over the air.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's me.
Good.
We'll just keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, no one's ever told me I'm too quiet. No, I'm just kidding. So that is one thing. And I think they really are pretty purple. They're very easy to be. There's some houseplant ones too, right? So I think that tends to be like a very I want to say like a grandmother plant, like Nana. Like, did your Nana's garden have them, or?
No, I didn't plant because she was.
She shade.
Was more shade, yeah. So I didn't have quite a thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So.
But you're right, yeah, and that's our Dalmatian bellflower, the Campanula portentialengiana, if I butcher that at all. But yeah, that's a native.
None of us would know that,
Europe, yeah, but that's the one that you see with, again, those nice thin, upright bellflower types. Yeah.
Yeah. So how about the tall, the more of the upright bellflower or campanula?
Yeah, and that's where we're going to see, I think, what you were saying a lot of in the garden center. I remember too, way back when I was starting in the garden center, there were a lot of like the clustered bellflowers and the hybrid bellflowers, and they were going to give you anywhere from 2 to 4 feet, depending on the ones that you found. I think, again, the campanula glomerata, that classic clustered purple one. I'm falling on the name, but I think it was Freya, was that early to midsummer blooming, very like rich purple or mauvey lilac, depending on that group. I think that was one of the taller globe ones as well, but I might be wrong. The glomerata, sorry. I think I said something else. But yeah, that was what I think of when I think of upright campanulas, was that group, that big ball, those clusters that went up the stem above that kind of medium dark green foliage. Were those ones.
And you know what? It just dawned on me as to why I stopped using them, actually, is because there is one that I think was one that was sold in nurseries back in our day. Me too. Are you listening? Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
You're good. I'm like, your face. I'm like, whoa, I don't know where you went.
No.
But it is now become a weed. So I
Mm.
know at my old garden, and I know when I shared plants for my old garden, which was like 14 years ago with people, so it's more of an invasive bellflower. I often see it in people's gardens. And I'm telling them, like, even though it blooms and it's pretty and it's beautiful purple flowers, it is a runner and it is invasive, and you can't let it bloom and you can't let it go to seed because you're never going to get rid of it. So I think that's the one plant that got me really to stop using them, when I think about it, because it's a shame, because when you do see this plant bloom, it is lovely.
Stunning.
But
Absolutely stunning.
it's stunning, but it is part of that same family, unfortunately, right? It's a bellflower.
Yep.
And I know I purchased my first one, so it's kind of like goutweed, but I mean, it's prettier. It's something that they sell, but it can be very invasive and very much like goutweed in the sense that, with roots and getting it out is really difficult. Digging it out is near impossible. So I think that's really why, because I was never, it just made me sad. So that's kind of one of the things. So that aside, I mean, there are, especially the ground cover ones, there are some really lovely ones. And if you're getting the upright one when it's in bloom at the garden center, as long as it's really nice and open or really clustered, right? Those would be the two extremes, where I find the one that's invasive is much more of a bell.
Yeah, I think more of like some of the older hybrid ones, or the ones that went into some of the more modern hybrid ones, and the Korean lilac as well, or Korean lilac. Sorry, Korean bellflower, different show. Yeah, they are the ones with the very distinct. Yeah, that we've done that one, Matt. They're the ones with that very distinct, big long bell that you get, is those ones. And then again, like you said, there are some ground covers and medium-sized ones that have some very wispy looking spikes or racemes with some distinct little bells that can be invasive as well, for sure.
Okay. Okay. Oh, we got Darlene has written in. She said that, Matt, you win the prize, an autograph book by Joanne, Shaw, and Matthew Dressing. That is the proper pronunciation of the plant. Well, thank you, Darlene. Yes. And, Matt is so good at all of those botanical names, and he doubts himself because the rest of us had no idea. So you can say whatever you want and we'll be like, woohoo. So thank you, Darlene. But thank you for verifying that he had that right. And Bob is asking if campanula attract rabbits. We have so many of them on our property. I would not want more.
Yeah, you know what, Bob? Excellent question as we move down into some of our uses. You know what, especially the dwarf ones and the upright ones as well. They both, especially the dwarf, again, show great rabbit resistance, and some of them even showing deer resistance as well. So great for rabbit resistance if you've got them creeping in and you want something with a little bit of resistance and some flower power. Definitely check out some of our dwarf, low-growing bellflowers. Our Rapido White, our Rapido Blue are two of the common ones that we're seeing on the market still. Our birch hybrid dwarf, blooming all the way from early summer through early fall, 6 to 8 inches tall, 12 inches wide. So a nice low rabbit resistant ground cover. But
although I don't know, Matt, my book has, like, when it's attracted to birds and hummingbirds and butterflies, it has a picture of the bird and butterfly as meaning it's a good plant, and next to them there's a picture of a deer. So I don't know, does that mean that it attracts deer?
No, that's deer resistant.
Deer resistant.
Yes. It should be deer resistant.
Definitely. So keep in mind, Bob, that rabbits don't like anything has texture or fragrance. So things like catmint that's scented, Russian sage that's scented. Lamb's ear is like a meh plant, but you could plant it in front of other things. Like it's not super attractive necessarily. Certainly the flower is not, but the fuzzy leaves, they don't like that. So definitely there are a few things to think of that they don't like, right? Those are the first two that pop into my mind. Can you think of some others?
I think you got the classic ones for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, anything that, well, even some of the herbs, like you can tuck in some of the herbs that have like the strong scents, like rosemary and thyme and things like that. So the rabbits don't want anything scented.
Yeah,
So that's something to think about if that helps you deter the rabbits. So yeah.
that's right. Among the other uses, again, we've got some drought tolerant for our dwarf ones, great for rock gardens. Because of the long bloomers, unlike our Phlox subulata, our creeping one, I mean, if you're looking for a foliage, that would be a good texture. But a lot of the dwarfs, again, have long blooming time. So good for containers in rock gardens, again, rabbit resistance, some edging. Our upright ones, again, we're going to use them for cut flowers. Some of the smaller ones, the 2-foot ones might be a nice specimen in a container because of a nice bloom time. And then in the
Mhm.
garden, we're going to use them again for mass plantings or borders or specimens, something like Kent Bell, which was one of the popular upright hybrid bellflowers, up to 4 feet tall, 2 feet wide, distinct, that rich purple downward turned bell-shaped flower, blooming all summer long.
Canterbury bells, like that's another name, right?
That's another good name for
Yeah,
those
that's
ones.
it's a much bigger cup
Bigger
flower. Yeah, bigger bell.
bell.
But that shades of purple, you can't beat it,
No, no,
you really can't.
like
And
royal
and
purple.
they do have white as well, like you mentioned. And I'm thinking
Mhm.
there wasn't there for a little while. I don't know how successful it was, but I thought there was a yellow one. Like foliage was yellow and the leaves were purple, or am I mistaken? Even in the waterfall one, wasn't there a waterfall one that the foliage was
Oh,
chartreuse and the I know. I'm
I honestly don't know that one. If there was one,
okay.
I'm gonna have to do some after the show
Yes.
research.
Okay. Yeah, so
Variegated campanula.
wonderful. I know. So I think there's a place for it. I really
Definitely.
do. And it's just one of those that, it is again that cottage, garden look and the English garden look, and mixing it with the other phlox, mixing it with some carpet roses, mixing it with some catmint or some hydrangeas could really, especially if you've got a small garden, I think the goal is to really maximize the colors, like what's blooming, so if you start with the subulata phlox all the way to the campanellas and the paniculata phloxes and some hydrangeas in there, boom, you've got, from May, if not April, till September, you've got color, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we liked about pairing our phlox with our bellflowers or our
Mm-hmm.
campanulus is, one's blooming and the other ones are growing, and then that one stops and then these ones grow. So it helps kind of that succession of flower and that long seasonal interest. And to, like you said, bridge some of those weird gaps between like bulbs and the summer perennials starting their bloom in June, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think it's nice to have perennials that go with each other and that are still fairly well behaved, aside from that one variety I mentioned, but they're also similar to phlox in that they stay put, and they're pretty reliable and not a lot of staking needed, that type of
No.
thing. So I think they're a really good choice. And I love chatting about perennial month, but we're running out of, we've been doing this, I think this is our third or fourth year, right? We're running out of perennials, everybody, which
Yeah.
is why I'm looking, as we wind down our show, I am looking forward to next week that we can talk about some, maybe we couldn't talk about one plant for the whole show, but we can mention, 5 each or something like that. Of those, like, lesser used, but still very good, reliable perennials. So next week, everybody. So please send us it's our Down the Garden Path podcast at hotmail.com email this week. Send us pictures or send us some of your favorites. I'd really like to hear about them, and I'm going to survey all my friends too, so that way I can make sure I have 5 for sure. So that's almost a wrap. I know we're a little shorter on time today, but we do want to tell Matt, do you want to talk more about the book? We do want people to.
Yes. Well, like as Darlene was saying, an autograph book. I've actually got one in hand
That's right.
of our wonderful book. So if you want to write us, we can arrange to get you an autographed copy. Again, Down the Garden Path podcast at hotmail.com. But yeah, definitely check out our brand new book, we've taken all of our wisdom throughout the different podcast episodes. Mainly, I think what inspired us was our Month in the Garden series, where every Monday
Mhm.
evening, and again, they're still out there in your favorite podcast provider, and as well as our websites, where you can find, the Month in the Garden, where we end, for example, June with July in the garden, and we go through everything in July that you want to be looking for, from trees and shrubs to evergreen, deciduous, seeds and bulbs, and annuals and perennials, and much, much more uh, throughout the whole month, what you really need to do in an easy to follow, quick tip format. It's not long blocks of text. It's right to the point about the subjects that you need to make sure that your garden for that month is low maintenance and sustainable. So let us help you through all the months. We've got all 12
Mhm.
in our book. Very easy. I think it's going for about it's going on Amazon.ca right now, and I think they threw it on sale. So check out Amazon.ca or Amazon.com
That's right.
for your copy right now. If you have bought the book, we'd love for you to leave us a review. Let the others know how wonderful you found the book,
Mhm.
and let us know. So we'd love to hear from you.
That's right. We would. We really would. We're very proud of it, and you guys have been a big support, and how much you've enjoyed our shows over the years at these different months and stages, like Matt was describing, is really why we felt like we needed to do that deeper dive in the book. And we could have, there was so much content, right? We had to
Oh yeah.
pull the plug at some point. And we joked because when we initially started, we didn't know that we could get even to 100 pages. We were like, oh man, do we have enough content? And what would we do? We had to throw in some more pictures and quotes. We had all these extra things that we thought we could do to fill it up. But yeah, 100, what are we, 136 pages?
139.
39. There you go. So we had no trouble at all. So we are very excited about it. And we love sharing it with you as much as we love sharing the show with you.
That's right. And just as we close out the show for another week here on Reality Radio 101, James has written in and said, hello, Matt and Joanne. Is it me, or is your show getting so much better regarding topics? I can't believe how much I learned here. Thank you. And yes, James, we're always getting better because we're tackling wonderful topics to help you achieve a great garden, going those deep dives. So always stay tuned in for new and exciting content every Monday night here at 7 o'clock on Reality Radio 101. Thank you, everybody who's written in a question. Thank you for those who bought out and checked out the book. We're wrapping up. We'll see you next week here on Down the Garden Path, live on Reality Radio 101. Have a good week, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your host, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.